Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and betting preview for this week's Valero Texas Open. Gonna go through all the last second info before lock to make sure you're ready to make all those lineups, enter any prop slips over there on Underdog and Prize Picks, and in general go over any of your questions heading into Thursday. So first off, welcome into the live chat. Got a little coffee in hand, ready to build some lineups as soon as we get off live stream here, and ready and researched up and all of that to get all of those questions answered for you. So first off, welcome to the chat. Barry Doug down there. What is going on? Hello, mate. Says, hello, you are a great host. Cheers from Aussie. Well, first off, appreciate the kind words there, and welcome into the live stream yourself. Barry is really liking Benny Ann this week. I like it. Definitely fits this kind of golf course. You got David down there in chat as well. Just welcome on in and let's get this thing rocking. So first off, talking about the golf course, just a couple housekeeping things. Not much has changed in terms of my modeling this week. So I usually like to start there, talk a little bit about the track, but none of the information that we've gotten from the course, right? Some of that boots on the ground information has changed how I'm looking at this golf course. The rough is its usual 2 inches. It's running about average in terms of the firmness. So we don't have a super firm and fast track out there because of the time of the year. Also the overseeded nature of this golf course, but it's also not going to be extremely receptive. So we don't really have to skew it in one direction or the other. And I think when we're looking at the stats from 2023, that's the same kind of situation that we had. So I think it'll be pretty consistent from year to year out there. And again, it makes our lives a little bit easier as we don't have to tinker with the modeling all that much. In terms of the weather, a little bit of adjustment that needs to be made. So first off, on Thursday, it's going to be one of the better scoring days of the week. You have pretty calm conditions for most of the PM wave with a lot of your real wind, your sustained and your wind gusts coming from about 10 a.m. over there to about 2, 3 p.m. local time. And whether you're the morning wave or the PM wave tomorrow, you're going to have solid conditions to get after it. But if things are going to be equal, right, if it's going to be solid conditions for all of round one, well, then we got to look at round two. And for round two, we'll look at the NAM model over here. We'll look at a few others on there as well. You'll see that the PM wave is distinctly harder than the morning wave. So if it's going to play pretty flat tomorrow, I think a lot of the models agree with that over here this close to lock. Well, Friday is going to be the real talking point. And as of right now, based on these kinds of forecasts, right, the sustained winds, right, go up as the day goes on. Believe it or not, the wind gusts actually go down as the day goes on. But if we take a look at the GFS model, which I think, at least per my experience, has been one of the more accurate models here on windy.com, you can see they're calling for it to be better in the morning than the afternoon. You can take a look at the HRRR, which is a little bit better, right, within 24 hours. But you'll see once again that the sustained winds are higher there in the PM wave per this model, and the wind gusts are pretty consistent across the board. So I'm leaning towards the PM AM wave getting a slight advantage for the slate, but I don't think it's completely definitive. So it's not like I'm stacking half my lineups and only taking guys from the PM AM wave. What I am going to be doing is taking about 15 to 20% of my lineups, fully stacking only those PM golfers, and then in the rest of my exposure, pretty much just leaving it wide open. So I am going to have a small subset that really goes after that correlation, but it's not the kind of slate where I'm going to be going all in on one wave versus the other. So it's worth talking about. We're going to mention the weather every single week, but in terms of a lean, it is that PM, AM, and I don't think it's a must-play kind of weather situation. That's what we'll say about that. We'll leave it there. Not going to talk too much about the weather because we have a lot of player poll stuff to go through. So first off, if you have any questions about a specific player, it could be lineup construction, anything DFS related, now is the time for that. So we're going to go through a few plays that I didn't mention during my DFS preview. So a few highlighted plays in each of like the different pricing ranges. And then we're going to talk about game theory in each range as well. So we're going to spend a lot of time talking about players here. But if there's anyone in particular that you want to deep dive on, just let me know down in live chat. That's what we're going to do here. We'll look through the shots, gained metrics, whatever you want to take a look at, and make sure you have all of those questions answered. So first off, let's catch up on chat, see what is going on down there. We have Jack down there who says, good win by 4 shots on the DP World Tour by Kita Nakajima. Agreed. Extremely impressive. Kid is a stud, right? Former world #1 amateur, also a bunch of top finishes on the Asian Tour and stuff. Sure, we'll see him on the PGA Tour next season. I agree with that. Especially sooner if he gets some sponsorship invites, which I agree with you there too. BK double up coming up. I could see it. South Florida courses have treated him pretty well in the past. And we know he tunes up for especially this next week. Elevate says, for a safe cash play to make the cut, who would I take out of Novak, Schmid, Hoffman, or Moore? So my favorite out of those would be Andrew Novak. We're going to talk about Novak for sure. Ryan Moore is another player I really like this week. Charlie Hoffman has elite level course history. So I like 3 of those 4 plays. I even think Matty Schmid in this form is a solid play as well. So I don't think you can go wrong with any of them. My first instinct is Andrew Novak there. Thoughts on Mitchell, Todd, and Sam Stevens? I'm sure we'll talk through a few of those there on the live stream. My favorite out of the bunch would be Keith Mitchell and Brendan Todd. Sam Stevens, finished in 2nd last year, so clearly likes the golf course. It's just not hitting his irons very well. He's lost in like 4 or 5 straight events. Philly Fingers, what is up, Luke? What's going on, Philly? Is there an edge to be had with the long par 5s? Well, there's 2 ways to get it done, Philly. So on my course breakdown, there's going forward in 2, which only the elite tier power players can do. The more conventional method is going to be with your wedges. And if you just take a look at some of the more scoreable holes at this golf course, they're like the 400 to 425 yard par 4s. So on those holes, right, it's about hitting a really precise wedge. And then on the longer par 5s, a majority of the field, right, majority aren't reaching them in 2, right, because they're so long, have to hit really good wedge shots. So I'm not as worried about par 5 scoring. I have it in my model, right? It's one of my top 6 key stats that I'm looking at. So it is rather important to me. What's even more important are the wedges for me, right? Players that from 125 yards and in can score, because that'll be on the par 5s and on the multitude, like the 7 or 8 par 4s that are really short. Do I like Cam Champ and Keith Mitchell? I like Keith Mitchell. Cam Champ, maybe not my favorite golf course for him, but he is a high upside player. Large field single entry tournament, go PM AM or just mix and match. I would go with at least 4 PM AM guys, right? So I don't think you have to go with all 6. If you're mixing in 1 or 2 guys from the other wave, that's just fine. Balanced or studs and a dud. I'll have both builds. I would say for a single entry, I like the balanced build a little bit more, just personally a little bit more this week. I really like a lot of the 9K guys. Finally, sliding into a live, you've been busy or unnotified by the tube. Yeah, screw YouTube and the algorithm, right? Not pushing it out to everyone out there. But hey, you made it live, and welcome on in. That's awesome. Cheers, you were leaning Novak as well. That's good to see. Thoughts on Billy Horschel? I think he's a little bit chalky, but I get it. The form's been there, right? If you take a look at recent form, he's number 3 in the field. That is impressive stuff for Billy Ho. But if you look before that, right, I remember the 6 months of him being absolute horseshit, me taking chances on him and him not getting there. I worry about that a little bit. So, a chalky Billy Ho that's a little bit pricey, right, at $8,900 just rubs me the wrong way, right? Just feels like it's, a spot that could be a little bit of a trap. That's my hunch right there with Billy Horschel, but I get why he's chalk, right? He's playing well, so I understand why people want to play him. Am I fading Connors this week with the expected ownership? Yes. One and done in middle of the pack. Norn, Benny, and Bez are English. You're in one and done. So, we're looking for upside there, just like in a GPP, right? We want the top end scores. We don't care about just like making the cut and grinding it out. I would go like a Benny Ann or Bazane Hoot. And I prefer Benny Ann because he's had more ceiling performances. How about an Alex Smalley at, what is it, plus like 400,000 or whatever? That's just too crazy for me, but you never know. You throw like $1 on them, you could win a bunch of money there. Favorite mid 7K outside of Glover. We'll talk about a few guys I like there, but just, I guess, Eric Cole, right off the top of my head. I think he's a pretty decent play. Nicolai Hogard, too. What is available to members of your Patreon? So great question, 8 Game. So on there, I post all of these spreadsheets. That is a majority of the DFS content. There's also the Discord, right, where you can ask any questions. I post some additional info, especially on the weather side hitting into lock. But on there, right, we've got my entire player pool for GPPs. So not just the players, right? I talk up here in live stream. There are a lot more than I'm taking as a 150 max player. My projected fantasy points, which you can use for all of your optimizers when going out there and making your lineups. It's what I use when I'm building my set of 150. And they're catered towards every slate, right? They're not some cookie cutter projections and I'm taking from other people and just, averaging and putting out there like a lot of other sites do. There are quite a few big names that go out there and do that in the industry. These are catered towards every golf course, right? So based on my modeling, based on total model ranking, which is essentially they're, using recent form and long-term form to figure out if somebody's a good play this week, recent form ranking, course fits, right? This is more of a long-term thing, right? Looking at the course fit, right? Whether that skill set fits this kind of golf course. I use all of that to make my projected points. So what separates me from a lot of other tout sites is that I have algorithms that I've tested and used over the last 3-4 years that give me really accurate projected fantasy points, not just for the main slate, but also for showdown, right? So I do a lot of showdown projections, do it for rounds 2 through 4 every single week. And those projections account for weather, right? Just to start, right? Let alone form, right? Over the first 2 rounds, that's accounted for out there in those projections. And then for round 4 showdown, right? We have all the placement points heading in. So you get access to all the spreadsheets, right? I do them for showdown as well, as you guys see in my content. And it's got the shots gained on there. It's got the form at this golf course, right? Course history, last 24 rounds, last 12 rounds. You also get to see exactly what I'm using in my custom model this week. So if you want to try and replicate that or just slightly change it, right, and go out there and do something for yourself, it gives you a way to go out there and do that. So that's what my Patreons get. They get access to this, and that's just the DFS tier. I do a lot of prop stuff too, right? So obviously I do a lot for like underdog, prize picks, all of that too. There's a whole tier for that where I'm posting averages, projections for every single round, what I'm expecting like the average birdie rate to be, right? The average bogey rate, greens regulation, et cetera, et cetera. A bunch of shit on there. So you asked, I gave you guys the whole spiel there, and that's what's on it. A whole bunch of shit. It's not a quick answer. There's no way to answer that quick because there's a lot to it. What's going on? For GPPs outside of Glover, right? I gave you Eric Cole, but I'll give you a few others here. So we're going to talk through a few, but Doug Gim, I know he's a little bit cheaper than what you're looking for there. Nikolai Hogard, right? Maybe a little bit cheaper than what you're looking for there, but I like those kind of plays as well. Let's see. Where else will be at chat? Thoughts on Bo Hostler? Good player, good form, but maybe not the best course fit. So I'm playing him. I like the low ownership, but he's kind of just like an average to an above average play for me this week. Thoughts on Davis Radley, who showed a little bit of form last week. I worry about his volatility, right? He's going to have spike weeks, and then he's probably going to fall off rather quickly. So depending on the format you're entering, if you're in a large field GPP, I worry about the ownership just a little bit, but it's not too out of hand. Do I think Harmon will be chalky after playing so well at the Players? No, because he played poorly the week after, missed the cut. So no. Whereas the Patreon should be a link in the description of this video. So feel free to check it out. Are the projections able to be downloaded as a CSV? It's an Excel file. So yeah, you should be able to open that on an Apple version. I do it all the time on my Mac. I'm able to open it up. It's not a CSV, but you can easily just copy and paste that into a thing that you can make into a CSV. You can just save it as a CSV if you want to, right out there on your end, and do that to upload it. So yeah, it's compatible. It's an Excel file. It's about as compatible as it gets. Philly Fingers, who do I think is the highest upside with the lowest ownership for one and done? So my favorite one and done play would be Jordan Spieth because it'll be sub 5% owned. So to me, that's different enough in one and done's, right? Sub 5%, and he would be my number one pick. Was this Ludwig's first tournament appearance last year? I'm not sure. I couldn't tell you if it's his first. I know he played this when he was still an amateur and missed the cut. Fitzpatrick ready to pop off. I think it could be a week for him. I think it's a good course fit. So I like Max Homa. I actually really like Matty Fitz too. I'm playing both of them out there in my lineups. And yeah, you know how I mentioned I like the balanced build just a little bit more this week? I like everyone from Morikawa down to Jordan Spieth here. So if I really like these 4 players and I want to really jam them into lineups, that's going to make me more balanced, right? Skipping a lot of this 10K range. And I will say I'm playing one of these guys up here in the 10K range, but a lot of the guys I'm really jamming in terms of leverage, right? Really trying to get over the field on are these 4 players in particular. So yeah, I think it might be a Matty Fitz week, and I like that range in general. Thoughts on Mark Hubbard with that elite approach play, really good around the green too, which I like. So yeah, the 2 stats that I'm really hunkering down on are around the green and then that approach play. And he checks both of those boxes. You burned him at Pebble. That makes a lot of sense. Dang. So I guess my number 2 pick, right, low owned, high upside would be like an Adam Scott. I actually bet him to win at 50-1. So or even a Tom Kim. No one's going to use them, right, because of the illness out there at the Players. You could take that approach too. What's going on, Samuel? You like Colin too? Yep. Morikawa's interesting. I took him at 30-1. So Hard Rock Bet actually laid one of the better numbers in the industry on Colin Morikawa. So I couldn't resist it 30-1. So yeah, I might go that direction as well. let's talk through a few of these tiers now. So again, if you have questions about specific players, I'm going to circle back on those questions here in just a few minutes. But let's go through this 10K range. So 10K range, you have a ton of ownership on, and a lot of it is because of the pricing. Because we have guys down in the 5K range, right? They put it the whole way down to $5,000, and we don't have Scotty Scheffler in the field, right? Who normally, right, in this kind of pricing would be taking up 50% exposure, right? Like we've gone to that point where he'll be 13K and he'll be 50% owned. Well, now you have a whole range that is absorbing all of that ownership. So the byproduct of that, and all of the ownership is on here, right? It's the one category that I don't have censored on here. You can see 28% for Rory, 28% for Hideki, and I've got Ludwig at nearly 27% himself. So these guys are getting a lot of attention. There are much higher owned than they probably should be. So unless you love somebody up here, right, you'd be willing to, bet them outright or something like that. You probably want to avoid a lot of that range, or at least if you do, I mean, you don't have to, right? If you love that range, you really want to go studs and duds, then by all means, go ahead and do it. It's your prerogative, right? You're making your own lineups. But at the same time, if you do avoid that range, or even just 2 out of those 3 players, you're knocking out like 56% of the field, right? At least 50% of the field, right? With those 2 players alone. And if you want to really get bold about it, now I'm not fading all 3 of them, but fading all 3 would give you well over 60% leverage, actually just over 70% leverage out there for the field. It could be a real good way, right, to separate yourself from the rest of the lineups. And the byproduct of that is also giving you all the salary that you want to work with, right? There are a lot of guys down here in the 6K range that are legit golfers this week, right? Andrew Novak, right? It's a player that we're going to talk about a little bit, who finished well here last year, right? Has a bunch of top finishes here in 2024. Who, if you took him, right, you could take 2 or 3 of these guys up here from $9,000 plus and still make a really solid lineup, right? We're not taking like all 6K guys with your last 3 spots. It's just, there's a lot of upside, right, to fading the top end of the board here. So they're all going to be chalky. A lot of it is because of the pricing, with this dynamic pricing from, 13K the whole way down to 5K that they're doing now. And that's some of the side effects of that happening. A player that I really like up here, and I guess I spilled the beans on Matty Fitz, right? I really like him too. But Max Homa is $9,900. I mean, he's, to me, even at this point, right, just as good of a player as Aberg, if not better. I know he's had maybe a rough, last 2-3 events, right? That happens even for the best golfers in the world. And he's coming in way lower owned, which to me is going to be an automatic jam spot, right? I liked Colin Morikawa for a lot of those same reasons. And the golf course, right, I know he's AM Wave, right? So I slightly prefer the PM AM Wave. So maybe in single entries, I'd be a little bit more hesitant. But for large field GPPs, where you still have a 4-round sample to work with, right? 2 rounds where we can't even account for the weather at this stage, I'll still take that shot on a player of his caliber, right? Somebody that wins golf tournaments seemingly every single year. So 18.3%, call me a buyer on somebody like a Max Homa. But there are a few other guys over here in the 9K range that you could say that exact thing about, right? And hint, right, Matt Fitzpatrick, right, would be another one of those players that wins golf tournaments. I know he's AM Wave, right? Not ideal, right, in terms of that weather situation, but it's not the type of weather edge that I think you have to play in all of your lineups. So, and a lot of those GPP lineups, again, that's most of my exposure out there week to week for DFS. That's where these kind of players are going to come in especially handy. Down here in the lower end of the 9s, you have guys like a Benny Ann, Billy Ho, Alex Noren that are getting some exposure, especially because of their form, right? Like you got 18% on Billy Ho, you got a 20.2% Alex Noren right there. The only reason that they're that chalky is because of the form. In reality, they're way overpriced, right? They're nearly $9,000 in a field with a lot of legit golfers, which normally would suppress their ownership, but they're still the highest owned players in this range. You can go down to a Brian Harman, who is a much better player than those other 2 in arguably the same kind of form as those other 2 players. But because your model, right, ranks them as like number 2 and 3 of the field, right, you have to play them, right? Everyone that's out there and has become a huge data nerd out here in DFS. And granted, I'm an electrical engineer by trade. I am like the biggest data guy there is, but I also understand that game theory is a thing and that some golfers are just better than other golfers, even if they don't model that way, right? Over a recent form sample, Brian Harman has won a major championship in the last year. Brian Harman has had insane iron stats, right? Over the last few events. Sure, missed his cut last time out, but he shouldn't be half the ownership, right, of guys like a Billy Ho and an Alex Noren. So A lot of people are going to want to know whether I'm playing like a Billy Ho and an Alex Noren. The answer is no, I'm not, right? I'm fading these sort of players. It's like why I'm fading a Corey Connors, right? He's 25% owned. I know he's won here twice. I know he's played well at this golf course. There are tons of horse courses that fall flat on their face, and I can't stomach playing a 50% of a Corey Connors and wanting to use that to get leverage, right? I don't want half my lineups riding on one single player this week, let alone somebody like Corey Connors that usually lacks top end upside. So, I mean, he's going to need a top 10, right, to go out there and be optimal this week. And honestly, I'm not certain that he's going to do that, right? So I'm not going to play him in half my lineups for that kind of leverage. So a lot of the chalky players, I'm just crossing out by default. And if I'm going to take somebody that's higher owned, right, these top three players, I feel a little bit better about doing it, right? Whether it is a Rory, Hideki, or Aberg, I think all three, right, you could take in 50% of your lineups and you wouldn't be as worried about it. But you can't tell me that you feel great about doing that with a Corey Connors. And you certainly don't want to play like 40%, right, of like a Billy Horschel or an Alex Noren. So if you're matching the field on these sort of players, I understand it. I think that sort of approach is what I would do if anything, right? If I felt like I had to play any of those sort of guys. I'm not doing that this sort of week, but I think that, at least to me, would be what I would do if I was leaning that direction. So that's what I'll say about some of the chalk in that range. Brian Harman, as you can tell, is a player that I would definitely like as a pivot. Russell Henley too, right? Russell Henley has everything we want at this golf course, is really good with the wedges, is extremely accurate off the tee, solid around the green, good putter, right? When he can find his best stuff on the greens. Just feels like normally he'd be chalky at this kind of golf course, but because he missed the cut the last time out, he's coming in at just 12.4%. Down here into the 7K range, you have a lot of chalk up here. Most notably, it's a Christian Bezuidenhout, who I really wanted to play on Monday. In fact, I had him down on my Patreon sheet as if he's not chalky, that I would have him in my player pool. But yeah, he is chalky, right? He's 16.9%. I think in single entries will be well over 20% owned for some of those higher dollar contests. And on top of that, he fits the golf course. I really wanted to play him this week. I just, again, cannot feel like I'm not going to feel comfortable playing him in like 40% of my lineups. So unfortunately, not getting to that sort of player. Somebody like Akshay is uncomfortably high owned. Maverick McNeely's getting ownership. Lucas Glover, unfortunately, is pretty chalky himself. So it's not like you have to fade all of these guys, right? In fact, I'm playing 3 of those 4 players. So, I'm maybe breaking my role a little bit up here towards the 7K range, but I'm also fading like almost all the chalk up here in the 9 and 8K range. So, if there's one range where I may be splurging a little bit on chalk, it is up here in the 7s. But out of like a Bezuidenhout, Akshay, McNeely, and maybe Lucas Glover here, if you're fading 2 or even 3 of those 4 players, that would be a spot where you could leverage against the field, right? That would be like nearly 40, maybe even 50% ownership that you're boxing out right there, which would be a pretty good way to differentiate yourself, right, compared to the rest of the field. So if you are finding yourself taking guys like an Alex Noren, maybe a Billy Horschel, right, in some of your lineups, or even a Corey Connors, right, up here at $9,400, I think a good way to make sure that you're not duplicating yourself, make sure that you have some leverage to the field in your lineups, would be to take that more contrarian approach right here, right? Rather than up there towards the top, right, just forcing in some of your differentiation here it's another good spot where you can do that, right? You have guys like an Eric Cole, who's just as good as some of the other guys around him. Maybe not as good a form over the last 2-3 events, but Eric Cole was the rookie of the year and made the cut at this event last year, right? He would be, far from a bad pivot in this range. I won't say Ricky Fowler because his form was just too bad for me, but like, a Bo Hostler at like 7% ownership, solid form. I know the last 2 events are maybe not as favorable for him, but was nearly your first round leader last week, right? Was on absolute fire at the Houston Open over there on Thursday, had solid approach stats to start 2024, is a player that I would take a chance on here for some leverage. So that's the game theory approach up top. Down towards the bottom end of the 7-6K range, you really want to try and avoid as much talk as possible. There's not a ton to worry about down here. So I guess Austin Eckroat getting a little bit chalky there. Guys like Novak, a little bit popular. Same thing with Ryan Moore, but none of them are out of hand. So, as long as you're not taking every single chalky player right down there from 7K and below, you're probably going to be fine in your lineups. There's just not as much concentrated ownership. So if you're not differentiating up top, right? If you're not differentiating with this 10K range, if you're not using this 9K range to differentiate top into the 8s, right, where there's a lot of real chalky players, and you're still taking some chalk up here towards the top of the 7s, The problem that you might run into, right, when building lineups is trying to get different elsewhere, right? Because with that 7K range down, with the pricing spread out the whole way from 7,000 the whole way down to $5,000, there aren't guys that are going to be 10, 15% owned down there. So it's a little bit tougher to differentiate yourself down there, right? You're going to take guys that are super low owned, but your other 4 spots are going to have a product ownership that is much higher than what you're hoping for. So my recommendation would be to be intentional, right, about getting different in one of those top 3 ranges, and then using that to go out there and make your lineups different to the rest of the field. Like Doug Gim, he's an accurate driver, also really good with his shorter irons. So with his form, also low ownership, I expected it to be much higher than what I have him at here as a player that I'd taken lineups. Andrew Novak, already mentioned his top finish last year, also just really solid form, right? Number 2 course fit is just next level stuff for Andrew Novak there. You also have S.H. Kim. This is an S.H. Kim type of golf course. You want to take him at tracks where driving distance isn't the end-all be-all, and where the shorter clubs into the green come in. So I like his wedge play. I like the fact that he can get really hot with the putter. So a guy down here in the 6s that I would consider for a few lineups. And then we also have Michael Kim here, another player that really benefits from a course that isn't super driver heavy, also really good from the 125-yard and in range. And then the last play we'll go through is Lanto Griffin, a winner at this event in this golf course in the past, $5,400. Or maybe it wasn't a win. It might have been a runner-up finish. I'm not entirely sure with Lanto. I know he's had some top finishes here, though. His shots gained at the Valero is through the roof. And a player that's really good with the off-the-tee play, at least when it comes to the accuracy, right? Not the longest player, but from 125 yards and in is really where he makes his hay with the approaches. So a player that plays well in Texas, not just at this golf course, a lot of the other events that you see out here in the PGA Tour, whether it's the agronomy, whether it's just feeling at home, might be some of that for Lanto Griffin, but I like him as a complete dart throw, right? And there's not a ton of guys at this price range that I'm taking in lineups, but a few that are maybe worth mixing in. So I guess I'll say like Ches Reavie is another guy that I'd probably mix into a few lineups, but there's not like 8 or 9 guys down here. So I believe just looking at the names here, I think there's like 4, maybe 5 of them that I'm mixing into lineups from like $5,600 and below. But because I want to be a little bit more aggressive with some of my 8, 9K range players, or even the 10K range up here, right? Taking like a Morikawa with maybe a Fitzpatrick and a Jordan Spieth, by taking a player that's $5,400, then I can still live in that 7, 8K range for my last 2, 3 spots. So that's how I'm handling some of my lineup construction. There are a few pivots, a few complete flyers that I am mixing into lineups, but I'm not going to have super high exposure to any of them. Let's see, where did we leave off? Any thought on Matt Kuchar? Love the course history. And the form's not great. So, I want to add that caveat, but really good course history. Should short game putters be at the top of the chain? Short game with putting, I think, is a way to get there. But I really want short game with wedges. That is like the nuts kind of conditions, nut kind of playing style for me this week. Thoughts on Grayson Sigg? Really good approach player, really good around the green. I'm playing him just because of that alone. And the form's been pretty decent as well. Thoughts on Bez and Ant? Chalky players in both cases, but I get why. They fit the golf course. They do a lot of the things that people are looking for, including myself. So chalky, but I get it. The Patreon's a good price for ownership, stats, and projections. Good info to help decide on your own plays. Appreciate that. And yeah, that's the point of it. So it's, hey, if you find it helpful for that reason, that's a good thing. Thoughts on Baddeley? I like the form. He fits this kind of golf course, right? He's a good wedge player. He's also good around the green and on the greens. Unfortunately, not very good off the tee. And if there's a golf course, you can kind of get away with that. It is this golf course. So he's going to have to keep it out of the natural areas, the really dense forest. But if he can do that, I think we'll have a solid week. Any single entry strategy? So if I was building a single entry, I would have a lot of this 9K range. I would probably avoid the 10K, make that one of my leverage spots in terms of differentiating. Just because of the salary, right? If you go down here to the 9Ks, you can take like 3 of these players here, right? Maybe even 4 of them if you really wanted to force it into a studs and duds build, and then go down here and take like a 5K player. Go down there, mix in a 6K guy to finish out your lineup. I prefer maybe just 3 guys right down here from the 9K range, and then using a more of a balanced build. So that's what I'm doing for single entry. Now, reason for that is I just think that you have a lot of quality players there in the 9K range that I want to jam into lineups. Like, to me, guys, Colin Morikawa, Max Homa, when they're in form, they could be up there in the 10K range very easily, right? Jordan Spieth, same thing. Colin Morikawa, right? Now he is in the 10K range, but could easily be like the second most expensive player in this field. We're getting a whole $1,000 discount on them and the ownership's lower. It's just like a no-brainer, right? For me to want to jam these players. So that's what I'd say for single entry is I'm really prioritizing those four. PM Batia or AM Cole. So in single entry, I might lean Batia, but the ownership is probably going to be higher in Batia in single entries, right? Might even be like 20% plus. And Cole will probably be like 7 to 10%. So depending on your ownership, if you need a pivot, then take Eric Cole. If you don't need a pivot, then take Batia, is how I would go with it. You were loving SH Kim this week as well. Great to see you're playing him. Yeah, it feels like an SH Kim golf course. How do they get ownership projections is what I'm assuming you're saying there. It's different for everyone, right? So there are websites that, just like the projections for players, just take everyone else's stuff and average them. And those are the slapdick websites. What you want is somebody to have their own algorithm, right? So that's what I do, right? I have a whole book. It's a best-selling book on Amazon that goes over how to make data algorithms. So this is something that I'm extremely familiar with, right? And I wrote an entire book on it, which you guys can buy yourself to try and figure out how to make these kind of things for yourself. But I also have a electrical engineering degree, a lot of CS classes that I took throughout that, a minor in computer science that helps me with a lot of what I do. And it comes down to a lot of different factors. A lot of it comes down to projections. So essentially, a lot of people, right, build their lineups, especially for GPPs, on optimizers, right? When you're entering a 150 max, a majority of your lineups aren't 150 maxers, but they're people playing like 20 to 40 lineups. Even with 20 to 40 lineups, you do that on optimizers. So your highest owned players are the guys that have the highest projections, right? So a lot of ownership algorithms, or at least the ones that are good, right, will base them off of projections. And it won't always just be your own in-house projections, right? Sometimes you'll have to look around the other parts of the industry and get a feel on which players, right, are popping in each set of projections. That's a good way to know where ownership is going to come in. That's a huge part of my algorithm when it goes out there to making them, at least for the main slate, right? When I have the time to go out there, analyze different sets of projections, that's how I'm able to go out there and calculate that. For Showdown, it doesn't deal with that. I don't have the time to go around and aggregate that. That is more so based on leaderboard position, also shots gained metrics between the round. We could have this talk for an hour, right? And I wouldn't be able to go through all the different factors that I have to consider with ownership. So it depends on what site you're using. Some slapdicks just average out stats, and that's their ownership for the week. Some of them calculate themselves. You want somebody to calculate themselves. Does Streelman make the cut? I could see it. He's not my favorite play this week, but I could see him making the cut. Decent form coming in, right? You're in 8 game. Love to see it. What are my thoughts on Ricky Fowler? Extremely talented. He's going to, snap out of it at some point, and he's going to start to play well. The unfortunate part is that he's going to have to, snap out of it, which has been horrible for quite some time. So I'm not sure if it's going to happen this week. In fact, I kind of doubt it, right? Just happening out of nowhere. But he does like this golf course historically. That's for sure. Congrats, 8 game. You're now a member of Gsluke DFS. Locking a player or two this week. You're saying you are why I win? Yeah, you're crazy. I know you like locking a few players. Let us know one of your 2 locks. I'm very curious to know. I'm assuming it's one of those 9K guys, or maybe even like a Rory that you're considering locking. I would love to know. Thoughts on Robbie Shellin at 5.6K. 2 top 15 finishes and gains with the irons and gains around the green. So he's one of the plays down low that I am taking, Ryan. One of the guys I guess I didn't really want to point out, but I'll say I'm playing him this week. Yeah, and it's a lot because of that skill set and the course history. Cooch is also long odds to win at 300 to 1. Oh, wow. Does seem a little bit disrespectful. He's probably not winning the golf tournament, but his top 10 odds might be worth a look then. Do I think Hideki's interpreter will place any bets at Augusta? Oh boy, I'm just not going to comment on that. That's a little bit of a strange comment for sure. Let's go ahead and talk through some lineup construction stuff now. If you have any questions about DFS, you can still go ahead and throw it down in chat, and we'll figure out what we're going to do here. So in terms of building lineups, right, it depends on the contest you're entering. If you're entering a single entry, right, I'm going to have a different strategy with them when I'm entering large field GPPs. But the one thing, especially on the MME side, right, going out there and entering a top-heavy contest, is I want to make sure that I'm getting that game theory edge in. So like I was mentioning before, you want to be very deliberate about how you're doing so. So whether it's skipping that 10K range entirely, and being a little bit more balanced, right? That's a way to start your lineup off and cross off a good amount of the field. So if I go down here and I throw in like a Max Homa to start my lineup, maybe a Jordan Spieth is my second man in, right? We've eliminated that 10K range and also, right, taken two guys that still have some ownership, right? It's like 16, 17%, right, with these two players apiece. But because we're not taking that 10K range, that's alone, right? That fact that we don't have a 10K player is going to give us a different lineup construction, right? It's going to give us more salary to work with, and we're crossing out about 100% of the ownership right there. Down here in the 8K range, we'll go ahead and throw in like a Tom Kim, right? Try and get a little bit different with one of our spots there. We'll take maybe a Bazane Hoot. So I don't love Bazane Hoot in GPPs, right? But if we started this contrarian, right, we avoided the 10K range and whatnot, you could afford to take a Bazane Hoot if you wanted to in a large field contest. So we'll do that. We'll throw in more of a chalky play just because we can, right? Because we're getting so different with it. You could throw in a Bo Hostler there, and then at $7,100, you could play whoever the hell you wanted to down here, and you would be plenty different regardless of the GBP that you're entering. So this is just to show you that you don't have to, make this rocket science. You don't have to take a pivot at all 6 spots in your lineup to go out there and make that kind of thing work. So it's a slate where there are some obvious pieces of chalk, right? And as long as your lineup's not starting like an Aberg, let's say that your second man in is like a super chalky Corey Connors, third man in is like an Alex Noren. As long as you're not starting with like this kind of lineup, you're probably going to be okay, right? There's pieces of chalk that you can take. Let's say that you started like Aberg, Noren, and then rather than taking a guy like Corey Connors, you go out there and take, a slight pivot in somebody like Tommy Fleetwood. You could probably make this lineup work, but you're probably going to still have to throw in some sort of pivot here, right? Still going to have to get different in at least one, maybe even 2 other spots. So rather than taking like a chalkier McNeely, even a chalkier like Eric Van Rooyen, who's close to 10%, maybe you have to throw in like a Nikolai Højgaard. Maybe down here at $7,200, rather than taking, a kind of chalky Lucas Glover, you take somebody, excuse me, guys. That was coming for a while there. I was struggling. But you have to take a Putnam, right, at lower ownership because of that chalk that you're taking there at the top. So there are repercussions, right, to going out there and taking chalky players in lineups that not only affect, your chances of duplicating yourself with other people, but also getting leverage when your guys actually pay off, right, and moving yourself up those GPP leaderboards. So that's what I'll say about the GPP stuff. Single entries, like I said, I'll be a little bit more balanced about it. And then in cash lineups, I don't know if I really have any cash locks. It doesn't feel like a good week to go out there and play cash. I would probably play Corey Connors in a cash lineup. I would probably play Russell Henley out there in a cash lineup. And I'm looking for guys that are in form and that drive the ball well. So I would probably take Batia. I would probably take Keith Mitchell out there in this sort of lineup. And that leaves you with a whole $8,500 remaining. So I'm sure that you could find a way, right, to round out that sort of lineup. But it would be all the really accurate and long drivers, right, which are pretty much these 4, right? These are 4 of your best total drivers in all the PGA Tour. That's how I would handle cash. And the reason for that, right, are players with a really high driving floor. All 4 of those guys also are really solid iron players too, is their ball striking gives them an incredibly consistent level of form, right? They're guys that make a lot of cuts, guys that maybe don't finish in the top 10 as much as they should, but they have a lot more top 30 and top 40 finishes than their peers. So that's why I like them for cash. They're chalky guys to begin with, all because of that ball striking form coming in. And I don't play cash myself, so can't say that I'm an expert when it comes to that, like I am on GPPs, and I play every single week and have multiple 5-6 figure takedowns. But for cash, yeah, my biggest takedown is probably $500 and like a $250 head-to-head. So I'm definitely not as involved there on that side, but still willing to give my advice there. Let's see if there's any last-second DFS stuff. If not, we're going to go through all the stuff on props, which I have a whole video out and whatnot, but we'll talk about that. Didn't know that I was a best-selling author. Yeah, I am over there on Amazon. You don't know how I do it all. I had a lot of help when it came to the book, but yeah, it's time-consuming, but you're willing to do it when you love it, right? And I love sports. I especially love golf and talking about golf, fantasy golf, betting on golf, all of that. It's a lot easier, right? When it's easier to put the time in when you love it, right? Dave says you've been riding Matty Schmid the last few weeks. Any thoughts on him for a top 20 at plus 475? That seems like fair odds, I would say. I'm not sure I'd call it value, but it seems like fair odds. And the form's been there. So if you've been going behind him for the month at this point, that's pretty sweet. You're locking Rory to mush him so he'll miss the cut, and then locking him when he wins at Augusta. There you go. So at least you have a plan for it. I have to say, that is realistic, right? He misses the cut this week. You get him at like 10% ownership at Augusta, and then he wins and smashes. That'd be pretty sweet. It'd be well worth, right, the lock and him missing the cut this week, right? It'd be worth it just for that alone. Any Monty love? Nope. At least not for me this week. I don't think he's a terrible play by any means, right? So I don't want to say that. It's just that I like other guys around him a little bit more. So he's not my favorite play. I wouldn't say I have any love for him this week, but I'm not against it. Eric says, who would be the cheap play of the week? So how cheap do you need me to go? So I guess the real question, right? If you're talking 7K range, Lucas Glover is probably my favorite play. He's also coming in with some ownership. If we're talking really cheap play, right? 6K and below. Andrew Novak. If you're talking 5K and below, it's maybe Michael Kim. I don't love the 5K range. So yeah, it's probably like Andrew Novak or a Lucas Glover is probably what you're looking for. You haven't heard me say anything about Fleetwood. What is my opinion on him? I think he's playing horribly. I think that's the main issue, right? That most people would have with Tommy Fleetwood. But he's coming in low owned, right? He's 11.9%. He is a relatively useful play, right? If you're trying to get different to the field. So there's a time and place to taking Tommy Fleetwood. So you just got to ask yourself whether you're willing to take a guy that's out of form and just hope that he snaps out of it, right? And captures that top end upside. That is certainly possible. In fact, it happens quite a bit, right? To players out there on the PGA Tour. It's just a risk that you have to take, right? He's definitely got a lower floor than a lot of the other guys around him. You like bargain shopping with the Korn Ferry Tour guys, the clearance shelf, as you call it. And you watched an inexplicable amount of tournaments last year. So that's a way to do it, right? To see the guys that are finishing top 5, top 10. There's edges to be had in a few of them, Chris. Like, what is going on with Ben Coles, right? So as somebody that also did that last year, Ben Coles has got to turn around at some point, right? Based on just how talented he is. I think you'll see it happen here at some stage. So that's it for DFS. If you have any questions on DFS, I will still get back to those. But now let's talk a little bit about props. So I went through this in a whole video, so I guess we don't have to go through this in complete detail, as I do have a whole video posted already doing that. But scoring conditions for this year, and excuse me, guys, let me get a sip of this. And in particular here for Thursday, I think they're going to be pretty similar to 2023. So I'll let you guys look over some of the averages here on the screen. But I think here for round one, they're going to be pretty close across the board here. Let me get a couple sips of this coffee so I can wake up a little bit and get this. My throat's just inflamed right now. I'm not sure why. Alrighty, so as you guys can see with the averages, right, it's like 3.5 birdies, just over 3 bogeys per round, just under 11 greens in regulation, and pretty much exactly 7.5 fairways per round. So all of those, of course, right, going to be useful when we're looking through these prop boards. And the main thing that I noticed over here on Underdog, and the biggest edge by far, are these fairway props. And if you haven't already seen my video and locked these in yourself, this Brian Harman over and this Tom Kim over are ridiculous value, right? Just using the metrics from last year, it was a 53.6% fairway rate, which with 14 fairways equates to 7.5 fairways per round. Guys like Brian Harman are routinely top 20 when it comes to driving accuracy. Tom Kim last year was number 12 on the PGA Tour when it came to driving accuracy. So for elite tier players to be at the field average for a projection is just a huge misprice, right? And to give you guys an idea here, it wasn't just these two. And in fact, there were bigger edges for a while out here. They had guys like Corey Connors at 7 fairways. He's at 9 fairways over here on Prize Picks, right? That's an entire 2 fairway difference. They had guys like Matty Fitz at 6.5 fairways. He's at 8 fairways over here on Prize Picks. They had guys like, let's find a few other crazy ones. Like Denny McCarthy was at 6.5 fairways. He's at what, like, he's at 8 fairways, right? An entire 1.5 fairways higher, right? Over there on Prize Picks. There was just some crazy value. Like Tommy Fleetwood was at 7 fairways. He's at, let's see, I'm pretty sure he has one up here. He's over here at 8 fairways. So that was an entire fairway difference between the two sites. There was an insane amount of value to be had. And at this stage, the two that really haven't bumped are this Harmon and Tom Kim over. And they're both over here at 8 on the prize pick side. So there's a line discrepancy there. And let me bring up the Caesars website. So Caesars has lines for fairways, and they're actually even higher than what they have over there in prize picks. So if you're somebody that likes like plus EV analysis, right, likes going through and just comparing to sportsbook odds, which I know there's probably a lot of you out there that do that. It's highly effective. So I understand why a lot of you like the plus EV betting. Then you really have to like these lines, right? So they have Tommy Fleetwood at 9.5 fairways. They have guys like Matty Fitz at 8.5 fairways, 2 whole fairways higher than what they had him at on prize picks. Brian Harmon is at 8.5 and juiced minus 165 over. Let's get ahead of it before my throat gets nasty again. But Corey Connors, right, was at 7 fairways. He's at 8.5 and juiced minus 180 over. Like next level stuff here, right? Let's look at a few others. Tom Kim, right, a prop that we're taking at 7.5 fairways, right? An entire fairway lower is minus 180 towards the over, right? Like when you look at it that way, when it's minus 180 and it's an entire fairway higher, I mean, it's just ridiculous value that we're getting. So this Ricky Fowler prop under, I still like him under because he's not playing well. Again, the average for greens, I should say, right, is only 10.8 at this golf course. The ones that I feel really good about, right? If you just want to take a 2-man, and I couldn't blame you just for only taking these 2 props, it's those 2. They're a crazy value and stuff that we don't see very often, right? When it comes to finding props that are like 1, 2 entire fairways off another site and that you can leverage. On prize picks, there's not as much value. So I like a few overs on birdies. So you could take EVR for an over on birdies. I like that. Adam Scott also for an over. And then the other one was Eric Cole, he's also still at that same number over here in prize picks. These 3 players were all top 20 birdie makers on tour last year. EVR was, I believe, like number 20 on tour. Adam Scott was like number 10. And Eric Cole was number 8 on the PGA Tour in birdie or better percentage. And this year, EVR is still top 20. Adam Scott is still top 80. Eric Cole is still top 50 when it comes to birdie percentage. And last year, Eric Cole was at least 3 of 4 going out there pushing and covering this. Eric Van Rooyen, his first start here, also did that, was a 1 of 2 last year. So these guys, right, consistently over 50% of the time, right, pushing or hitting this line. And Adam Scott has won this golf tournament before, albeit like 14 years ago, but he still won this golf tournament out there at the Valero Texas Open. So 3 guys that fit the golf course that, again, on tour last year were top 20 birdie makers when it comes to birdie or better percentage. And they're projected what I think is going to be about half a birdie higher than the field average. So sure, it's a whole half a birdie higher, but you're talking about players that are already, right, above average to elite level birdie makers, right? Top 20 guys on tour, right, is elite level stuff. So they're projecting well over half a birdie better than the field. So that's the take on those sort of plays. Again, I think that these fairway plays are much better than maybe what we have over here on prize picks, but they're still worth mixing in, right? Especially if you only have access to a site like prize picks. Let's see. Any other questions to go through? If not, got a bunch of lineups to make. Let's see. Rory better fire off this week. Yeah, especially if you're locking him. I hope he does too. I'm playing him myself. And yeah, he's the one guy up top I'm playing. I'll say that much. Sorry to be late. Who is the one guy I'm playing in a single entry? Jordan Spieth. And yeah, I didn't see that comment before I see it, but it is true. I'm playing him this week. If Jordan Spieth is a core play for me, I'm playing him in a lot of lineups, okay? And he's the PM wave, so he fits that weather edge we're looking for. So just to give myself even more of an excuse to take him. It's a course that he's won at before. He was playing okay when he came into that win at Valero, but he wasn't playing overly well. Right? Like he's not playing horribly right now, but he's, again, not playing overly well. I don't know. I've got a cautiously optimistic approach to watching Jordan Spieth this week. So yeah, it is Jordan, but it might be because I'm a huge fan out there. The last thing I'll leave you guys with is I already alluded to this, but the outright numbers on Hard Rock Bet did get a lot better. So Colin Morikawa, for example, went down to 30-1. I really like that for an outright. I think it's a really good value. I bet Jordan Spieth at 20-1, but now he's 22.5-1. So that's actually even better value than what I ended up getting. And who else? There were a few others at 50-1. So yeah, Adam Scott, Tom Kim was at 55-1. So maybe you stay away from that. They dropped that down to 50. But Adam Scott at 50-1 to win this event, feels like pretty decent odds. So those were all bets that I ended up adding, just I guess making that official from the outright betting perspective. That's all I've got, though, guys. I appreciate all the support on the channel here as per usual. Going to be doing our round 2 through 4 live streams, so keep an eye out for that over there on Twitter, X, or over there on the Discord page. Well, I'll go ahead and let you guys know when I'm going live, but we'll touch on Showdown there, all the props from rounds 2 and 4. And like I was mentioning with the Patreon page, you can get access to all that behind-the-scenes information even before I make my content over there on that side of things. So if you want to use it for your optimizers, your own process, your own research, make sure to check that out there. If you want to know all the exposure I'm taking for props, there's I believe there's at least like 25 props that I've taken out there for round 1 already. Go ahead and check it out there on the Patreon as well. But that's all I've got. I got a lot to get done this evening, a lot of lineups to go ahead and throw in. And let's have ourselves a week, everyone.